Hour 4 here, mornings with Sharp and Hanley. Nick and Jimmy and Joey with you. Appreciate you making us part of your morning. So what we have coming up in November is our little Southern California swing where Nebraska will host UCLA. Then they will go out after a bye week to Southern Cal and take on USC. But this is also an interesting stretch of games for Nebraska. UCLA, Southern Cal, then Wisconsin and Iowa after playing Ohio State. That's when they will play UCLA. What type of team will Nebraska have? What type of team will UCLA have? Well, time to talk a little friend and foe segment. The Bruins of UCLA making their debut in the Big Ten, and we talked about where this team was a year ago. The win totals for UCLA, which, again, given what they lost, new coaching staff, at 5.5 is where UCLA's win total is right now. And to talk more about the Bruins, we welcome in James Williams on the UCLA beat in the Orange County Register. Good morning, James. How are you?
Good morning. How are you guys? I'm sitting here in LA traffic, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay.
We hear you well, and we know you
won't, about the same.
You won't be moving anywhere anytime soon right now. Yeah, I'm looking at our traffic right now. It's moving swiftly. I'm assuming that is not the case for
is that
you.
A Dodge Neon?
No.
Well, James, the last time I talked to you, it was when UCLA and USC had officially been announced as new members of the Big Ten. They obviously weren't in the conference yet. This was before Oregon and Washington were going to join as well. And we talked about the impact of that, what that would mean for UCLA. And so since the time it was announced that they would be leaving the Pac-12 and joining the Big Ten to now it being official and having a couple other teams from the Pac-12 joining them, what is the overall sentiment around the UCLA football program with this move?
Yeah, I think it's still kind of interesting. I mean, I think at some point in the season with the travel and whatnot, it'll hit them like a ton of bricks probably. But until then, it's still just kind of, especially for the football team, more specifically, they're still kind of going through camp, treating everything like normal. So there's not a whole lot of a different feel yet. I mean, yeah, you know, whenever you see the jerseys for media day and stuff, you see the patch, the Big Ten patch, that's different. Yeah. When we talked to Deshaun Foster during his media availability during practice, you have the banner, the backdrop in the background, and that has the Big Ten logo on it. But other than that, I mean, they're downplaying it a little bit just in terms of, hey, we're worried about ourselves at this point in the process. But, I mean, they're used to playing 3 straight non-conference games. They're going to Hawaii for week 1, and then boom, they're right in the Big Ten with a game at home against Indiana. So it's going to happen pretty fast for them. And I think there will be a point in the season where things will kind of be a little bit of an eye-opener for them at some time soon here.
UCLA was such a proud member of the Pac-12, Pac-10, Pac-8. And now the Big Ten, when I think about, yes, there's the other 2 schools in the Northwest, but when I think about UCLA and I think about USC, yes, there's excitement about some of these new opponents, but is there also a little bit of sadness because people don't understand they cared about the Pac-10 quite a lot out there. It meant something. So for it to go away, I don't think it's something that was taken lightly. It's just that was the business.
Yeah, it's clearly kind of just a business move. I mean, some people will look at it as, hey, UCLA is just tagging along because USC was looking to move and they needed a dance partner and they were hoping it wasn't going to be Washington or Oregon, let alone find out Washington and Oregon found their way into the Big Ten as well. But yeah, it was definitely a sad moment. And it is probably still sad for a lot of those fans that have been longtime UCLA fans, just because of, they had a common opponent nearly every year and they probably were pretty friendly at some point, I would think, with some of these other fan bases and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like when you've been in a familiar setting for so long, or you've been on the same job for so long, and all of a sudden you're moving to a different job or whatever the case may be. It's different. And I'm sure there's some jitters and some different things that are going to come along with it. And just a lot of the tradition, some of the bigger traditions that have kind of gone away as a result is what has happened with Cal and Stanford. I mean, there was, I think I did the math at some point. It was like 100 consecutive years or something close to it. They had played with Cal and Stanford year after year. And that almost got lost with the Cal and UCLA game during the COVID year, but they had to cancel games. And those two came together and put a game together, and that rivalry continued on. But with the loss of the Pac-12, yeah, that's just going out the window this year. So stuff like that kind of gets lost. But I think there's also a little bit of an excitement as far as what it can do in terms of ideally bringing in some new faces to the Rose Bowl in terms of attendance, because the Rose Bowl attendance hasn't been what they would like it to be, I would imagine. And obviously when it's a stadium that can seat anywhere from 80,000, 90,000, 100,000, depending on the event, and then you get these wide shots when they're playing Hawaii at home the way they have in years past, and the stadium's half empty. I don't know if you'll get as much of that when you have some of these Big Ten teams, especially those that weren't frequent visitors for the Rose Bowl game itself and are hungry for their first look maybe at the Rose Bowl. You may see some better turnouts. So I think there's a little bit of excitement when you kind of consider those things as well.
Yeah, we're going next year.
Talking to James Williams of the Orange County Register on the UCLA beat here on 1620 The Zone. James, maybe one of the more sneaky, really good hires in the offseason. We'll find out about Deshaun Foster, but Eric Bieniemy as the offensive coordinator, coming off of his success mainly with Kansas City, but also in Washington and that short stint there, now back in the college game. What's that been like so far? And more importantly, in handling this offense that maybe doesn't have the much hype superstar of a Dante Moore, but does have a guy like Ethan Garbers who takes care of the football, which we know in Nebraska, that can be a big deal.
Yeah, it's been interesting, right? Obviously, when Chip Kelly was in town running the program, he was his own offensive coordinator, so you weren't having to look at two different guys. You were just looking at Chip. So I just think from that standpoint, maybe it helps the players just to have a different voice in the room. Obviously, they're familiar with Deshaun Foster, but having that new voice in the room with Eric Bieniemy. Now, in terms of speaking of voices, during the spring, we've had the opportunity to watch over the practice facility from the parking structure when they've made that open to the public. And you will know where Eric Bieniemy is on the field at all times. He's very vocal. He's very, I don't know if demanding is the word, but he expects a lot out of his players. And obviously the players are going through some growing pains very early on as they're learning and figuring out the offense. Obviously, Chip Kelly ran a pretty complex offense just in terms of those guys having to learn different things and knowing what's what. And I think there's going to be some of that too. And I think maybe those guys are smarter because of having to work in a Chip Kelly offense. And I think they've appeared to manage well. I think the thing that they've kind of gravitated to, especially someone like Ethan Garbers, who says, hey, I like the fact that he's hard on us, that he can be tough on us at times, but at the same time, he'll sit with us during lunch and he wants to get to know us as guys off of the field as just normal human beings. But I think the thing that is attractive to a lot of these guys is they can say, hey, this is a guy that's been in the NFL. This is a guy who's coached and worked with Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce. This guy has been to Super Bowls, right? So I think they look at that. And for someone like Garbers who says, hey, my goal, my dream one day is to play in the NFL. And if this guy's done it, he's been there. He's been a player. He's been a coach at that level. Why would I not want to listen to a guy like that? So they've all been pretty receptive to the idea of Eric Bieniemy and what he brings. Obviously, there's these reasons or the word going around on why Eric Bieniemy was never able to land a head coaching job in the NFL. Maybe that changes here at the college level within the next year or two. But whatever the rumors and stuff about him not getting along with players and all that, we haven't seen any of that so far. In the early months here since he's arrived, but yeah, I would say it's been pretty positive. Now, talking to him with when he talks to the media, I think he comes off very well. And the thing that I've noticed about him is that he knows he's working with young men, and he likes the idea that he has that opportunity to work with the younger group and help bring them along, not to only be better football players, but to be better young men.
Talking with James Williams, who covers UCLA for the Orange County Register. And James, everybody talked about Deshaun Foster after Big Ten Media Days for the wrong reasons, but you get a chance to see him up close and personal and actually get to know him in Southern California. What is he like? Because, I knew when I saw that that's not Deshaun, but now people are going to get to actually know him. And I think it was sort of an unfair assessment, but I understand at the same time.
Yeah, it was a little bit of an unfair assessment of him, especially. And I mean, hey, that's kind of a tough first impression. But also that's kind of a tough situation when you consider you're in a half empty, cold stadium there, and then you have rows and rows of media in front of you. Like I've been saying, I don't know if I would have done any better in that situation. So I can't knock the guy for that. But yeah, the thing is he hasn't had Chip Kelly did all the talking, and we didn't get a lot of assistant coaches even just talking to us in the more intimate settings for the media scrums at practice. So much like a football player, Deshaun didn't get a lot of those reps in front of the mic and talking to us other than maybe during his playing days. So he still maybe has a little work to do on that, but I think he's also the kind of guy, especially being a player that's competitive, that he's not going to let that happen again, and he's going to learn from that. But how he's been at practice, I think, he's pretty exciting, and he's all about his guys. Obviously, the guys wanted Deshaun Foster there. There was talk of, I think, UCLA maybe meeting or reaching out to PJ Fleck immediately after Chip Kelly had kind of announced he was leaving. But the players demanded that they have Deshaun Foster, and I think they got their guy. And in doing so, you prevented a mass exodus of guys going into that transfer portal. And you got a lot of these guys coming back. So there's a lot of respect there for Deshaun Foster. Obviously, they like him, and he's a relatable guy, I think, to a lot of the guys. He's not that far removed from being at UCLA himself and kind of going through the coaching ranks there as well. So, and again, a guy who's been at the NFL level before. So he checks off all those boxes. And if you look at what he did the rest of that media day outside of that moment that he had, he was kind of hitting it out of the park when he was doing the different, on set kind of, interviews and whatnot. So I would tell people to look beyond just what that initial impression was and see what he's able to do going forward, because at the end of the day, they want to win games, and we'll see how many they're able to win in year one here.
James, the schedule didn't do UCLA much favors, especially
Not
that. Well, when you look at that back-to-back LSU, Oregon, and then, how about Penn State? We'll throw that in there as well. There's a stretch, obviously, and this was a team who won 8 games last year. This is a team that had a very good defense, and I know they lost not only the DC, but a couple of major pieces to that. But in your assessment of what this group realistically accomplishes or should be expected to, what does success look like for UCLA in 2024?
Yeah, so it depends on who you ask. If you ask Deshaun Foster, they're looking to win games and be competitive from the jump. And one of his players, I don't necessarily want to put his name out there, even though it was a public interview, but he said, the goal is to win a Big Ten championship. Now, is that realistic? Maybe not. But at the same time, what else would you expect a player to say, especially when they're in that locker room each and every day? That's the goal, right? So, hey, if it happens, it happens. But for me personally, I kind of treat this as a year zero for them, more or less just because of when you look at the hiring cycle, they were on the other end of the hiring cycle when Chip Kelly leaves and Deshaun comes in. Deshaun had moved on just a couple weeks before he was hired at UCLA. He had left and was the Oakland, or not the Oakland, but the Las Vegas Raiders, He was their running backs coach for the Raiders and Antonio Pierce, and they bring him back as soon as Chip Kelly leaves within a matter of days. So I don't even think he got settled in at Las Vegas. And he was right back at UCLA where he wanted to be, and that's their guy, and that's where he wants to be. So they're going to look to win. I don't know how many games they will win. I kind of been looking at somewhere around 6 games, maybe. I've talked to some UCLA fans that have the high expectation of 8 games. I don't really see 8 games this year, but I would say it's somewhere around 5 to 6. And I think the goal would be really just trying to be in the mix for a bowl game here at the end of the season.
James, to wrap up, just if you were to look at the areas of this team that, let's say they are successful, say they do get to, because I think hitting the over 6 to 7 wins, given that schedule, would be somewhat impressive. I would agree. I think a lot of people kind of look at it similar as a year zero. If that is to happen, what would you say would be the catalyst behind that? What would lead UCLA to being able to reach that number?
Yeah, I think 2 things, right? I think it's going to be Ethan Garbers having to be their guy and produce some quality offense for them as the guy leading the huddle. They do bring back running back T.J. Harden, and they have a great group there in terms of their wide receivers. So they have all the weapons they need to be successful on offense. But I think it's really on the defense. You lose Guyatu Latu, who was the #1 defensive player taken in the draft. You also lose the Murphy twins, Carl Jones. You lost a lot of production there with that pass rush. So there's just a big question mark on who it is that's going to be producing any sort of pass rush for them this year. Obviously, the expectation is going to be high just because what the bar was last year and how high that was set. But Jacob Busick is a guy that I think he transferred in from Navy. He had 2 productive years last year, was dealing with an injury. He comes in this year and is a guy that maybe can lead them. Devin Apayu is another guy that's been on the roster, transferred in from Notre Dame a few years ago. He'll kind of be looking at his first significant playing time this year in a Bruins uniform. But again, they've also been trying some different linebackers there on the edge rush. Femi Oladipo and also Kane Madrano are some guys that they've been exploring. So they're still trying to find the recipe that can work for them. And maybe that bleeds into the season a little bit during this first game or two. But when you start hitting that 3-game stretch there with Oregon, Penn State, and LSU, they're going to have their act together if they want to at least try and win one of those 3 games.
James, great stuff. Appreciate you spending time with us. I'm assuming we'll see you in Lincoln in November. But, hey, welcome to the Big Ten. Enjoy it. We look forward to maybe catching up with you here in November.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I've been told I need a winter coat, so I'm in search of one.
Now, to be fair,
welcome to the Big Ten.
Some years in early November, it can be unseasonably warm, so it might be 70 that day.
That's a confusing thing I've heard, too. So I'm like, I don't know how I feel if I have to bring a winter coat, and then it's like sunny.
Yeah.
If you see southwest wind, and especially the higher the wind speed in the forecast, you're probably going to get a warm day in the fall.
Yeah, the northwest wind or northeast wind,
not your friend.
You got to look.
Southwest, think 70s.
Yeah.
I might be reaching out to you guys for a weather report as we get closer here.
All good. Appreciate it, James. Have a good one, man.